early on in my education, I was diagnosed with dyslexia. And so that always made education kind of a challenge.
Dyslexia is when you see letters backwards?
See letters backwards and stuff. And so I've progressed a little bit moving forward with that.
Thanks for joining us on the Lifeguard Show. My name is Ryan, and today we're with Jonathan Bohn. Jonathan, what are we going to be talking about today?
Today we're going to be talking about business, family, raising kids, and money.
Love it.
My educational background, I'll take a little bit of a story. It's a very interesting one. Probably start a little farther back, but interestingly, I always say I rode the short bus to school. Actually, it was not a literal short bus, but I was in a special class. And so early on in my education, I was diagnosed with dyslexia. And so that always made education kind of a challenge.
Dyslexia is when you see letters backwards?
See letters backwards and stuff. And so I've progressed a little bit moving forward with that. And that is really more of an auditory. I couldn't understand phonics. And that's the way they taught school.
Right.
They taught you how to read by phonics, but I learned by context clues. So I memorized words. I mix up words because I look at the shapes of words.
Right.
It's really funny because my kids actually catch me because when I read children's books and they're simple sentences, and when they could start reading, they'd be like, "Daddy, that's not what that says." Yeah, I added a few words there because, I'm context clues. I got the gist.
Right.
So anyway, that was, education was always kind of a challenge, but then it became a challenge. So kind of being a high challenge person, I ended up going to Furman. I got a degree in computer science and doubled in business because I figured if I was going to be writing programs, it was most likely going to be for businesses or corporations that wanted to do something. And so understanding their processes was going to be important. So I was Furman, graduated in 2001 with that. Spent a few years working and then went back to school at night and got my MBA and concentrated in finance. Again, I felt like I looked around, my dad being a medical doctor. At the time, I was working for a turf grass research specialist. So I was doing turf grass research. And they spent all the time doing the money. I spent all the time doing the research. Right. And my dad was always like, "Oh man, I got so much overhead, but I don't have time to deal with it." And so from that, I kind of saw that finance is kind of the language of business. Right. So just being able to speak that language.
That money is important.
It's important. I mean, being able to understand that, like I said, it's a language. And so just being able to talk that and understand that can be important. I don't think you have to go to school necessarily to have people teach you that. There are plenty of business people that they understand it. They don't know exactly what the technical words or terms are all the time,
right.
But they understand it fairly clearly.
So was your master's from Furman also?
My master's was from Emory University.
Okay,
so
awesome.
I did that at night while we were living in Atlanta. That was one of the challenges coming out of college was everybody said, "Oh yeah, you got a great education, but no experience." And so I didn't want that experience again. So I worked full time while I was going to school at night. So that was a 3-year night program.
Wow. Was that hard?
It was hard. It's funny because we were talking about education.
Right.
So I started off with, hey, learning disability going up. Every year as I progressed, it got easier. And the reason it got easier in education was because by the time I got to grad school, they're like, here's the case studies, here's the stuff. We had a few tests. It was interaction, but they don't care how you got the work done. They were testing just your knowledge.
Right.
I don't care how you got there. I don't care if you just magically knew it.
Yeah.
That was it. Elementary school and stuff's not that. They're testing the processes. And that was the problem that I had. It was like in math, they'd be like, here's 100 homework problems to learn how to do it.
You got to show your work.
And it's like, I get 10 of them. It'd take me forever because it was really slow. But I do 10 problems, right? And I understood it.
Right.
I didn't need the other 90 to figure out, the other 9 to figure out how to do it or whatever.
Sure.
And that was kind of the start of it because they would be like, "Hey, Jonathan has, he's acing his test, but he's flunking his homework."
So it sounds like, as you were progressing from sort of that dyslexia challenge and then moving through high school and then getting into college, you actually kind of started to enjoy learning.
Yeah. Like it was, I've always enjoyed, I think learning became one of those things for me where it was like, I went back and got a grad degree looking back on it. It was more about myself. It was about proving to myself that I could do it. It's one of those things that I look back on when I'm in a dark hole and say, this is something that I accomplished, right?
That's awesome.
It was never about like, I'm going to a top university.
Right.
Right. Or I was going about, I was never that strategic. I mean, people act like I was super strategic. I wasn't. I just knew that I wanted to go. And some of that I think is culture too. I mean, my dad was a doctor. Most of his siblings were lawyers, right? Like that was our family culture, right? Like that, that was kind of expected that you would progress past even college.
So looking back, what would you advise or what recommendations would you give to someone who has a learning disability or has some sort of challenge in the educational system? Because some people have such a bad experience in, middle school and leading into high school even, they're out. Like, I don't want to, school's not for me. I don't want to do it. So what advice would you have for them?
Yeah. I mean, people that struggle with school is learning, just understanding that school is a structure and a process. And so like anything, I had this interesting professor in college, right? I went to all my professors beforehand and said, hey, I have this learning disability. This is where the challenges are going to be. And I had one ask me directly. He's like, so you're asking me to change your course? And I was like, no, that you're not hearing me. Because if you do that, the other 95% of the students in the class that learn in that method are going to be out, right?
Right.
So when you have, so somebody that may be struggling with that is just trying to be creative and find your own ways. I think that's what it taught me, right? Is to find paths and creative ways to do things.
Sure.
And so it can be, ask for help can also be important. Our pride gets in the way. Yeah. We're all very prideful people. You don't like telling people, hey, which is always funny because now I get a lot of feedback where it's like, you're so smart. I'm like, it's not because I'm just like naturally smart. It's just because that's what we call a black box. Like I've just always filtered. It's always been that struggle for me.
You've worked very hard to get there.
I've worked very hard to get there, and everybody, a lot of people work hard.
Sure.
I think that's the thing about, that's why I was getting into grad school, right? It wasn't about how hard you worked, right? It was about results. And that's when we get into the business and talk stuff like that. That's a lot of what we see in culture and stuff today is a lot of people want credit for their effort, right? And it's like, well, I always say you can work really hard cleaning a bathroom with a toothbrush.
Right.
That old military, clean the...
Yeah.
So like you can work really hard or you could get a pressure washer and just pressure wash the thing, right? Like the results can be the same, but the amount of effort that it takes to get the result can be different. And I think that's the hard part for somebody with kind of that disability is because you want credit for all that effort that you're putting in and you're not getting it, right? Like I put in twice as much effort and I'm making C's.
Yeah.
Right. And then when you try to go apply for a job, right, it can be difficult because I never look good on paper. Right. So you put your resume down, to put my resume down, I never stacked up. Which is funny because that was where getting into Emory. So how did I get into top universities? Because they had an in-person interview. That's what it was. As soon as I could walk in the door and I could talk to you one-to-one, could sell you, right? Could pitch, you could see who I was. But just on paper, scores and grades and stuff was always kind of difficult. And I think that's the thing to bring it around for somebody that may be struggling is understanding that while you may want credit for that, that's not what you're going to get, right? And so it's being able to stop trying to prove yourself to others and just learning to prove yourself to yourself. Right?
Yeah.
the results and things will come.
Yeah. And it sounds like too, you didn't, at least for the majority of the time, sure, sometimes you felt sorry for yourself, but overall you didn't feel like you were a victim. You were able to like overcome the circumstances that you were in, process through it, and, talk to the professors, let them know what's going on, and move forward.
I think for a while I felt that for a long time. I think that's been a lifelong journey, where I still feel some days like that seed's up under there, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm continuing to progress and learn.
And what's the seed? Let's dig into that. What's the accusation, or what's the label, or what is it?
Well, I mean, the accusation comes through is that, I was lazy in some ways, right? Because it didn't seem like I was putting out effort when I got tired, or, wanting to say, hey, I know I only made C's, but I still want the same thing that somebody has a 4.0 got, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of that, it's not even that we all have that in some way, and that is looking around and comparing ourselves to other people, right?
It's tough. That our whole culture is built around looking at other people literally all day
long. Instagram, right? My Insta life, right? Like you have your Insta life and you look at it and you see somebody's feed and you think they're going on vacations
every week
and they're just like eating steak every night, and their kids are like perfectly behaved. And,
they're in shape.
And it's just glamorous.
They look good.
Yeah.
Everybody looks good. Everything they're doing looks good.
Their makeup's perfect. You got these filters now that are crazy that, it's like, so, and that's what we want, right? We want people to see us in that manner.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to say, I'm going to put that aside. I'm going to kind of put blinders on, kind of like the horse. Right? The horse and carriages that we have down here in Charleston, right? Put the blinders on. It's like, I'm just going to focus on me and myself, what I can do and accomplish. And I'm not going to worry about how that appears to other people.
Yeah.
And that's hard, right? I mean, I still want to look good in front of other people, I still want people, like having people tell me I did a good job feels good, right? Like we all need encouragement in pieces. That's not it.
Affirmation.
Yeah. That's a good word, right? So we all need that affirmation, but it's where you're looking for that affirmation, right? And I think the affirmation, closing that loop, is that affirmation comes from knowing that I put in 100% every time, even if the results are bad, right? The affirmation is I put in 100%. I did everything I possibly could do.
Yeah.
Right?
To the best of your ability.
To the best of my ability.
And maybe it still doesn't stack up.
And
maybe I don't get second, third, even, fourth place, but I did what I could do.
That's right. And
I used what God gave me.
That's right. I return that. And that's something that's difficult to teach our kids, right? And maybe you need to pivot and say, hey, this isn't for me. Let me figure out where I can natural ability is.
Yeah. Play to your strengths, not just try to always working on those weaknesses. But
well, I mean, and going back to the education, I was in school. I ended up in computer science because I was taking organic chemistry for the second time because I was failing it and dropped out the first time because I was doing the med thing because my dad was a doctor. Everybody expected me to be a doctor, and so here I am. I'm second time I'm taking organic chemistry, but for some reason I took this computer science class. Actually, it was kind of the following term, I guess. But I took this computer science class, and I ended up having mono that term.
Oh.
And I was out for the first half of the semester. And then I came back, and I'm scrambling on all of my classes. I was behind on all of them.
Sure.
I still ended up making a B+ in computer science. I hardly went to class. The professor was super gracious, which is why I could, because the other ones, some other professors were giving me a hard time. So I had to focus on kind of catching them up. But my computer science professor was super gracious to me. And I went through and it was super easy. And I'm sitting there failing organic chem for the second time. And I'm looking at computer science. I'm I made a B+ and did nothing. feel like this is where my strengths is. Let me follow this path, right? Like again, that's one of those where people. It was 2000, the tech boom was going on,
right?
So a lot of people were, looked like a strategic move, but it wasn't strategic in the sense that was what's going on in the economy, and
it wasn't a trend.
Yeah, I wasn't following the trends of computer science. I was saying, hey, look, here's where my natural ability lies. Let me tease that out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, please subscribe to The Lifeguard Show. We'd love for you to be a part of our community, and make sure that you ring that bell so you can be notified of our next video release. And if you have any suggestions of content, please contact us through our website, thelifeguardshow.com, or you can leave us a comment in one of the videos on our YouTube channel.